Hey, Buddy Manning here. Welcome to the Garden Report. Back from Europe and thrilled to be talking to another man just back from Europe, Noah Eagle, who had the call of the USA games for NBC. And Noah, unfortunately, wasn't able to hear a lot of your call out there. I was listening to the French broadcast, of course, being in Paris
How's
for
your
that
French,
last week
Bobby? Is
there.
it good? You
No,
understood
there's
everything you
none.
heard?
There's none, but I saw it, and unfortunately, in the most exciting game, we saw Jayson Tatum taking a seat, and he took 2 DNPs during this run. It ended up becoming one of the bigger stories of the run, which I'm sure you weren't expecting going in. But that first game against Serbia in the group stage, he doesn't play a minute. And of course, in Celtic circles here and our shows and all the rest, an enormous story coming off the championship. And it actually resonated pretty widely around the country and even around the world. I was at a show out there, Noah, and this guy from Germany was like, "Can you believe Steve Kerr didn't play Jayson Tatum?" So many people were captivated by this story as it was happening in real time. You're calling that game against Serbia. What was going through your head once you realized, "Ooh, Tatum might not get in the game"?
Yeah, I think Bobby, we didn't really know what to expect on rotation stuff. Dwayne Wade and I had talked about it before that game, and I thought that JT would probably lead the second unit. It just felt logical going into the game, but at the same time, we didn't think anything of it until about halftime when we realized we looked through the box score and we're like, oh, Jason and Tyrese are the only two that haven't played. And we kind of expected Tyrese not to play. And I think Tyrese expected that he wouldn't play, which is also saying a lot. And I do think it's worth mentioning that obviously he didn't just win a championship. He did lead his team to the conference finals. He's not quite at Jason's level yet, but this is a dude that did lead the NBA in assists last year, who's a multi-time All-Star, who is an all NBA performer. So worthy just to say that obviously he didn't play much more than JT didn't play through this entire run. I know it's a different level, and Jason's the highest paid player in NBA history, and he's coming off a championship, and he's the cover athlete of 2K and everything else. With that being said, yeah, I think we were a little surprised at first, but then we started to look at it, and I talked to Dwayne a lot about it because he had been through the USA basketball experience, obviously, a couple of times. And he said that this is just sometimes how it goes, where it can be unknown. And even just going into a game, it can be unknown. I know Steve had talked to Jason about it probably at halftime of that game, or maybe even going into that game, about just the uncertain aspect that comes with being a part of a team like this. And it was also, I think, a little surprising just given the fact he was so efficient and so impactful in their gold medal game against France in Tokyo a couple years prior. But with all that being said, I think that they used the exhibitions to really assess what they had. They felt Devin Booker was a better fit for playing with LeBron James, Steph Curry, and what ended up happening in that first Serbia game was Kevin Durant comes back and he just lights the world on fire. And I think that's probably the aspect that people were forgetting about, that KD came in and made everything. He literally didn't miss in the first half. He had 21 points in that game. And that changes what your rotations might look like when a guy catches heat like that. Now, I know Jason didn't play again in the semifinal against Serbia, but I think a lot of that was matchup based. He plays in the gold medal game. Guys who were playing big minutes and maybe some of the other games weren't playing as many big minutes in some of the other matchups. And I think the best thing that Steve Kerr said, and Dwayne really relayed it to me, is this isn't an 82 game season. It's not an 82 game season with 48-minute games. It's a 6-game season with 40-minute games. You already have 8 less minutes to work with for your rotations. You can't really go deeper into your bench. And on top of that, one bad quarter, especially in those final 3 games, and this is what Dwayne mentioned really happened to them in 2006 at the World Cup. They had one bad quarter against Greece, and it completely derailed them. They were rolling. They were steamrolling teams, actually, and they end up losing that one game, and they have to take bronze instead of a gold medal back home. I think that Steve knew that. I think he knew the gap is not closing. It's closed with the rest of the world. And so he tried to react accordingly, and JT just happened to be caught in the crossfires. I thought he handled himself really well. Thought he didn't really complain. He went out there, he cheered his teammates on, he smiled. He had a great disposition when they did win the gold medal. And at the end of the day, they did exactly that. They achieved their goal. So it's hard to argue with what Steve did. I think a lot of people were puzzled, not just, as you mentioned, in America, but really in Paris as well.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing that became one of the bigger stories around this team because you had these other ones, the world catching up, obviously, and putting some real heat on them in a couple different situations here, especially the Serbia game in the semifinal. And that ended up being an all-time game, one of my favorite basketball games I've ever watched, especially just being out there and being around all these people from around the world watching this game and just mesmerized by the level of basketball we were watching there in that game. And they almost lost, so it would have been amazing to think if they lost that game, Tatum doesn't play, the
Yeah.
backlash that Steve Kerr would have received, that this whole USA program would have received. And along with those storylines, you got the older guys that end up being the closing lineup in that game, Curry, Durant, LeBron, you mentioned that group, and they end up being the ones who powered them to that comeback, which was amazing to watch. They just played at such a high level there, and Embiid too, who didn't start this run playing very well there, but you also had the Jaylen Brown controversy coming in as well. So, the two Celtic stars end up being these ancillary storylines to this team that, as you said, one, looked dynamic at times when they needed to turn it up, face some real competition. So you had the great play on the court that you're balancing alongside, obviously, earlier in the run and the exhibitions and all that, Brown not making this team and Tatum not playing much for this team. So
Yeah.
weighing those two things as we covered this run here, it was really interesting because you had all this stuff going on off the court. You had all this amazing stuff going on right in front of you on the court too.
Yeah, it was a fascinating experience in so many ways. It was an incredible experience, obviously, for a couple of weeks to be out there and to get to call some of those games. But you mentioned Embiid, and I think it's another great example to use. Well, Joel Embiid could have played for Cameroon and he could have played for France, and the expectation was he was going to play for France, which was why he was getting booed so heavily every time he touched the ball and took the court. But he decided to play for the United States, and when asked about it, he said his lifelong dream was to play in the Olympics. And obviously, later in his life, he wanted to play basketball, but he didn't start playing basketball till later in his life. So when he was a kid, he looked at these Olympic athletes and he said, "One day I want to be one of them." And he looked at his situations and he said Cameroon would have been his preferable choice, but he didn't necessarily think they had a great chance of making the Olympics. So when he looked at the other two options, he had lived in the US for more than half his life, and he said these are the peers that he's playing with more so than the French team as a whole. So he decided to play for the United States team. With that, we go back to the exhibitions. He's getting crushed for the way he was playing. We go to the beginning in that group play stage. He took a DNP himself. So this is an MVP of the league who was on the bench start to finish for a game. And I think
Yeah.
Steve Kerr, part of that was sending a message also to respond to the JT backlash in some ways. But at the same time, it was also to showcase how much of this was matchup based. And that game that he didn't play against South Sudan was a bad matchup for him. And we saw that in the exhibition against South Sudan. They brought him out to the perimeter and they went right at him. And the speed was a problem for Joel. And I think that he accepted that and understood where his role was going to be. And he also knew he was going to play a factor at some point in the win, which he did in the semifinal against Serbia in the fourth quarter. He was magnificent. They don't win that game without the contributions that Joel Embiid helped to aid. But yes, to go back to the Celtic side of it, the crazier part obviously is not just the fact that JB's off the team and JT's not playing a ton, but it's the fact that Drew and Derek, who are ancillary pieces in theory, I think that's wrong to call them that because of how good they both are. But on that team, they're not necessarily your top options. You know, you've got those two. The Jays are your number one and your number two. But Drew is a perfect FIBA player. And realistically, Derek is also a perfect FIBA player. And that's why I think they played. Now, Derek didn't even play in the gold medal game, which was a little surprising to me, just given how much energy and really the type of impact he was making for most of the tournament. But I think it just showcases the slight difference between what an NBA roster is and what an international roster is. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so hard. And again, I understand why the reaction was what it was for both JT and for Jaylen Brown. And you could easily make the argument that Jaylen Brown deserved to be on the team. With that being said, and Dwayne really made this point to me again in his experience, you have so many alphas on a team, and this team had so many alphas on it. You have MVPs, Durant, James, Curry, Embiid, that demand the ball, that normally have the ball in their hands every single time down the floor. And when you get to this Team USA environment, guys who have the ball all the time, normally in their NBA world, their role is significantly different. Devin Booker is someone who dominates the basketball on an NBA court. He has it isolation, he has it off of screens, curls. He's got sets run directly for him. Same for Anthony Edwards. Same for Tyrese Halliburton. Same for Anthony Davis, who gets spoon-fed buckets by LeBron James consistently. But you look at what their roles were now with this team. Devin Booker was out there to play defense, to rebound, to set screens, to be a connector on the perimeter, and then to make open shots and take his opportunities when they presented themselves within the flow of the game. Anthony Edwards was there to basically provide energy off the bench. He wasn't looked at as, hey, go get us a bucket. He's looked at as play elite defense and do the little things. And so I bring that up to say, that's why I think Drew and Derek were so perfect for the team, and why it's so hard to have so many guys like Jayson and Jalen. Now, I think Jayson deserved to be on there. And like I said, Jalen probably deserved to be on there. But Drew and Derek are seamless fits because they already are willing to do the little things. They're not guys who are going to go out there and every single night give you 30. They're capable of it, but they're not going to do it all the time. That's not what their game is predicated on. So there's value in having guys like that. And I think we saw that with both of their performances through the tournament.
Yeah, and that gave them a little cover too, at least from Celtics fans, because who's making the team over Jalen? It's Derek White. Yeah, Celtics fans, they like Derek White. And who's playing over him? It's Drew Holiday and Derek White, which was surprising because, as you said, they're not focal points on the Celtics above Tatum. But on this team, they both looked like they fit in pretty well. Now, Tatum ends up sliding in for that gold medal game over White, which is probably the change you could have made, to have Tatum in there for at least some minutes and not have this wild controversy spiraling over those handful of games there. But they felt like they had to play a role-based, tight rotation with guys who know what they need to do, and not just roll out the best 12 players in the U.S. and have them figure it out together. Could you have done that and still won? Maybe, but there was a small margin for error there, especially in the Serbia game. So I think in the end, as much heat as he caught, and he still is, and so, to some degree, even though they won, it's hard to kill Kerr for how they handled this, because in the end they come out on top. Now, again, one Serbia basket goes the other way down the stretch, and we're talking about an all-time failure here for this group, the way that they're judged being USA basketball. But it was a tough roster to manage. You mentioned Edwards too. I mean, he comes in saying this has to go through me. And so you're trying to handle all these egos, these guys who need to play a ton because this might be their last hurrah and are still obviously capable of carrying this team. And then all these guys, you mentioned Booker, you mentioned Davis coming off the bench. Like, there's just so many different star talents and guys you could utilize on this team. It was an incredibly, obviously it's an easy team to coach to some degree because they're loaded, but a difficult rotation to manage at the very least.
Yeah, and so the way that it was described to me, and I think Sue Bird, I know, said this on Mello's podcast. She said that when she played for USA basketball, and we're talking about an all-time great in the game of basketball, she said when she played for USA, it was the most uncomfortable she ever was in her playing career, dating all the way back, basically playing as a kid through high school, through college, through the WNBA. She said the reason was when you get to USA basketball, realistically, there's usually only two players that get to actually play their consistent game. So for the women this year, that was Asia Wilson and Brianna Stewart. Everybody else had to change their role. And so it's a very uncomfortable position to be in because it's such a short runway. You don't have a lot of time to really learn what you're supposed to do. So it has to be almost instantaneous. I think we saw that with the men. LeBron James was playing LeBron James's game. I think you could argue Kevin Durant got to play Kevin Durant's game. Curry, for the most part, is probably lesser volume, but especially in the last two games, got to play Curry's game. But you can't tell me Joel Embiid was playing his game. We didn't see that. You can't tell me Anthony Edwards was playing his game, or Anthony Davis, or Bam Adebayo, or any of those guys were playing. I mean, as I mentioned, Devin Booker. So I think that's what makes this such a challenge, is the onus is a lot of times on the player, but at the same time, it's on the coach to try to find which guys can fit together quickly. And the men had a little bit more time to try to figure that out than the women did. The women were playing, obviously, the W season, and then they had a week essentially to practice and then get right to the game. So it took them that first week. And I think we saw that even the gold medal game where they were still working through some kinks. For the men, they had, about a 3-4 week runway where they had a training camp and some exhibitions, but That's not a full NBA season. And you see guys clicking on all cylinders towards the end of the year into the postseason. Obviously, the Celtics felt like the exception to that, where they were clicking from day one. But a lot of that just comes down to, can you find the right guys to fit together? Because realistically, you're only going to have 2 to 3 guys that are playing their normal roles. So everybody else has to adapt. And that's difficult. That's difficult for the players, and that's difficult for the coaches and the coaching staff. And I will say, just going back to JT as well, I think part of the other reason he handled it well, his cousin Teron Lue is on the staff. He's great at managing that type of stuff. He's done it obviously dating back to Cleveland, where he had quite the situation with LeBron James and Kyrie and Kevin Love and J.R. Smith and all of the personalities that went with that. And then all the way through now to with the Clippers. But JT and T. Lue have a good relationship. I think that it was good to have him there just to kind of make sense of everything. And with that, again, he does deserve praise. I don't feel like he's gotten enough praise for how he handled the situation, because guys of his stature a lot of times would have mishandled it, and he didn't.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's not thrilled about it. I don't think he's thrilled about it, but he handled it well, as you mentioned. And some non-committal comments about 2028. We'll see what happens there. Again, it's a long way away, as he said. But I'm sure we'll see Tatum out there then, and he's going to be a bigger focal point on this team if some of the older guys aren't there. As far as going into next year goes, one of the last times I talked to you here on CLNS, Noah, I think it was 2021,
Mm.
and you were doing Clippers games at the time, and you told me the most impressive guy you had seen in the league to that point, and this is when his career was starting to roll a little bit, Tatum. And you said then he was going to win an MVP by 27. I'll still count it if he does it next year, even though he will turn 27 in March. But championship, I'm sure he'll take as well. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about it this morning, just this run he had with the Olympics and even the finals before it. That 2022 to 2024 gap where he loses, he really struggles on that run, breaks the turnover record, to dominating the Mavericks and that 16-3 run he in many ways led. The difference there was the passing. He has just become such an elite passer, and it doesn't always show in the assist numbers, but he just handles the crowds, the double teams, all the different defenses they throw at him so well. And even though his shot wasn't there for the playoff run, I think he finished 28%. He goes 0 for 10 during this Olympic run, so that's going to be a question with him going into next year, and his scoring bag to some degree heavily scrutinized. But with that, the passing has just leveled up many degrees here. And is he going to be able to put the full stat sheet together to win an MVP going in this year? I know there's a lot of talk about the motivation coming off this Olympic run. I don't know. It's just such a packed field. I don't think he's even one of the 6 favorites going into next year, but it's just amazing to think, since the last time we talked about him here, how much that passing in particular has come. So what are you expecting from Tatum going into next year off the championship? What do you just make of the perception of him at this point in his career?
No, I do think the motivation is real. I think it's hard to say otherwise at this point. I would say the MVP thing is difficult because of how great the team is. And as unfair as that probably is, you lose points just based on the voters. They look at the rest of the supporting cast. They say, all right, but come on. I mean, realistically, it's why Kevin Durant or Steph Curry or any of those guys weren't going to win when KD joined Golden State. It's like, that team's too good. They can't win MVP. Well, maybe Steph was still the best in the league, or KD was. It was the same for LeBron in many respects. Once he joined forces with big teams early in his Miami tenure, it was impossible to ignore it. But then eventually, once he got back to Cleveland, they go, well, he's got Kyrie and Kevin Love. Like, we know how great he is, but look at this newer guy. Look at this guy. So I think that it's going to be harder for the MVP side of it. With respect to everything that you mentioned about the growth of his game, I think that's real. I think the passing we definitely saw. And look, there are still some tough spots where he does turn it over, and maybe he deals with some pressure in an ill-advised manner. But more often than not, I think he's seeing the court. I think the game has slowed down a lot for him, and he sees where the pressure and he sees where a lot of the traps are coming from before they even get to him. So that's real growth, and that deserves a lot of credit. And with that being said, I'm not really worried about the jump shooting. Guys go through slumps all the time. I think we know how hard this dude works. We've seen that over the course of his career, and even just how he's revamped his body since he first entered the league. I think that proves a lot about a guy. We know how motivated he has been And I think we saw even just in this title run how he deals with pressure is still impressive. You know, even when he was slumping shooting the basketball, he wasn't afraid of the big moments. And I think that stands for a lot because most guys you see will wilt when they start to feel like they've lost something. And even though he hadn't had that same ability that he showed through the majority of the season and the shot making that we've really grown accustomed to seeing from him, he still was willing to go out there and try to get it done for his team in the biggest moment. So there's a lot about Jayson Tatum that I still love, and there's a lot that I still think he can grow with. But he's clearly one of the best players in the league. There was a reason he's first team All NBA. It feels like every season at this point, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. So the motivation will be there. The MVP will be difficult, but I'm excited to see what his encore to the title looks like because, to your point, if there's anything else that he needed, you know, it felt like we hear the hangover from the title all the time, where teams start to coast through the beginning of seasons or whatever else might be. It feels like it's going to be the opposite with this team. They're extra motivated. Drew and Derek are going to be Drew and Derek. They're going to be this. You know, there's never this with those guys. If KP is healthy, that's a massive boost, obviously. But then you bring in a motivated Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown coming off of an NBA championship where Jaylen looked as great as I think I've ever seen him down the stretch in the playoff run. That's a scary thought for the rest of the league.
Are they head and shoulders above? Obviously, they're going to have to play probably half the year without Porzingis. Hopefully, get him back for the postseason fully healthy. They didn't have him this postseason, which still makes that 16-3 run they went on all the more amazing. It's pretty much the same team coming back. Knicks, some of these other teams got reinforcements. Might be a healthier East around them. Obviously, they caught some breaks along the way here, but still a dominant run that they went through. Are they miles ahead of everybody else? Is there someone that could challenge them, you think? Or is this team, given what they've won so far and experienced together and just how together and conscious of their roles they looked last year, are they going to be even more dominant next year?
Are you saying in respect to the Eastern Conference or the whole NBA?
I'd say both, because there's definitely some teams in the West you got to talk
Yeah.
about.
So I would say the Eastern Conference, I think they're still the heavy favorites. With that being said, Philadelphia obviously got better. You add Paul George. In theory, you get a healthier MB than definitely what you had down the stretch. They add some extra pieces, including Yabusele now coming in, who played great in the
That's a good
Olympics.
name drop.
Oh yeah, come on, Celtics fans, remember the dancing bear? The dancing bear, never
I'm
forget.
thrilled he's back. Oh, and that dunk. What a
Awesome.
dunk.
Awesome. Oh, I just love that he's got now a new nickname I saw on Twitter, Beignet Wallace, which I'm all in on. So I'm going to be
Okay.
using that exclusively for Gershon. With that, yeah, Philly's going to be better. New York, in theory, should be even better than they were with the addition of Mikal Bridges, who fits them to a T. They do lose Isaiah Hartenstein, which I think was a massive loss for them. He just did so much of the little stuff, as we always talk about. He was exactly what Derek White has been for the Celtics, just in a bigger frame, essentially, for the Knicks. So I'll be curious how they replace him. But Julius Randle was hurt. Do they try to move him? Do they try to make some other roster tinkers, basically, as they go through? So the East will be interesting. Indiana obviously caught fire late, and we'll see if they improve and they can do it for the full course of a season. Milwaukee still has Dame and Giannis, and if they're healthy for a full year, who knows what they look like. So there are teams that are going to be threatening, but I do think the Celtics are clearly the best team and the best constructed team. And Brad Stevens is an absolute mastermind and fleeces somehow everybody. The ridiculous fact of going from Danny Ainge to Brad Stevens should almost be illegal in Boston, but we allow it because really we don't have any other choice. In the Western Conference, I still think Denver. I think Denver. It was hard. The long, and this is what the Celtics will deal with in some respects this year, but the long run of the championship, which they had 2 years ago, and kind of the turnaround, and let's get back to it. Obviously, Jamal Murray didn't play great. He definitely not in the Olympics, and even at points last year in the playoffs, he had sparkling moments. He had some not so sparkling moments. I expect Jamal to be better. They lose KCP. They really believe in Christian Brown, and they're going to insert him into the starting lineup. So you've got a starting group that is still, to me, as formidable as anybody in the NBA with Murray, Brown, Gordon, Porter, and Jokic, who is still the best player in the world right now. And to me, if you have the best player on the court, you're always going to have a chance to win. And I think that especially is in regards to Nikola Jokic. Now, I'm very curious about the Russell Westbrook addition for them. Like, what does that do for them? Is he there just to provide energy off the bench? Is he there to just play some defense? Is he there to rebound and push the ball up the floor? But Jokic wanted him, so there's a reason that Nikola wanted him on the team, and I'm very interested to see if he can get the most out of an aging former MVP. Oklahoma City, the addition of Alex Caruso was huge, and Isaiah Hartenstein. It was, I mean, I don't know if you could find
They're
two.
scary.
Yeah,
I don't think they've been talked about enough.
no, and I don't think you could find two more perfect guys to fit what they already had because Shea is so under control. Jalen Williams is a budding star. Chet was really impressive last year, but now Chet can move to the four, which I think is so much better for him. And you allow Isaiah Hartenstein to do a lot of the physical stuff. You got Lou Dort and Alex Caruso, arguably two of the best, along with Drew and along with Derek White, on ball perimeter defenders in the NBA. That team's really, really tough. And it's going to be really tough to beat. I think the other team that nobody's really thinking or talking about that I'm not saying is going to necessarily be a championship contender right off the rip, but should be looked at as a threat is Memphis. I think Ja
Okay.
Morant, people forget how good Ja Morant is and was, and how good Memphis was 2 years ago before everything started, or 3 years ago, whatever it was, before everything started going down. And now you've got Marcus Smart. I mean, everybody in Boston knows the impact that Marcus Smart can have on a team. To have Ja, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bain, Jaren Jackson Jr., and I saw a lot of Zach Edey last year in Purdue. I did maybe 4 or 5 Purdue games. I think Zach
Stay
Edey has a
healthy,
chance.
man.
Well, that's
Stay
it.
healthy.
Listen, defensively, he could struggle, but offensively, the way I look at him is he is Ivica Zubac of the LA Clippers, but 4 inches bigger. And Ivica Zubac is a double-double. He averages 10 and 10. So if you're adding a guy who can average 10 and 10 and be an anchor in theory as a rim protector, which Zach was at Purdue, to go along with Jackson, who's a former defensive player of the year, Smart, who's a former defensive player of the year, Bain, who is a 20-point per game guy, and Ja Morant, the most electrifying point guard maybe in the entire NBA. Not to mention what they can bring off the bench. And Santi Aldama, I think, is a guy that's underrated in the NBA world as well. That team's scary. Gigi Jackson was the youngest player in the NBA last year, was putting up 30 in games. So
He was
they've
outstanding. Yeah.
they've got a ton of talent in Memphis. Like, that's the team to me that nobody's really paying attention to. You know, what does Sacramento look like now with DeMar DeRozan? The Clippers obviously no longer have Paul George. Can it just be a healthy Kawhi and James Harden somehow leading them? I mean, they're super talented just with those guys, and they added so much defense to that team. The Lakers still have LeBron and Anthony Davis, and so long as those guys are healthy, they're a tough out. You know, the Western Conference is carnage, and it always is, but it does feel like this year in particular, a lot of those teams can challenge basically anybody in the NBA. And I'm looking at Memphis as the surprise team that really nobody is looking towards. But certainly Oklahoma City is going to be a problem. I didn't even mention the team the Celtics had to face in the finals in the Dallas Mavericks, and who knows what they look like with Klay Thompson. So yeah, the Celtics to me are definitely the favorites out east. I think the West, I mean, and I didn't even mention Minnesota as well in the conference finals. Like, the West has so many teams to me that are as good as anybody, and on any given night can beat anybody. The difference is they're going to beat up on each other going to the finals. And so can they beat a Celtics team or whoever it is in a 7-game series after the war of attrition that is getting all the way through?
Yeah, and I thought the 5 teams that played Boston toughest last year during the year were Philly, Milwaukee, destroyed them twice on their home court, but no healthy Giannis. I would throw Minnesota in there. I would throw Denver in there, who beat them, and Oklahoma City. And I still remember 2 years ago, Oklahoma City, I think, put up 150 on the Celtics on their home court. And that was when you're like, ooh, something's going on here. And now they end up being the 1 seed this year. The thing I'm most interested to hear you analyze going into next year, the rookie going into his 2nd year, Drew Carter. How's that gonna go on the Celtics sideline this year? Because that's gonna be a big change for them.
Well, I feel like it's still a miss that he hasn't changed the spelling of his name to Jrue. That's wrong. That feels like it was a layup that he completely missed on. Are they going to start wearing ties again? That feels like a second miss. What are we doing here? Quarter zips only. It's a quarter zip only broadcast with him and Scal. No, it'll be great. I think that Celtics fans already got a taste of what Drew can bring to the table, the energy he can provide. Obviously, it is impossible to fill the shoes of Mike Gorman. That is a legend, a Hall of Famer in every respect of the world. It is class personified. But Drew is going to bring his own spin to it, which I think Celtics fans got to see this year. He and Scal were great together. They have a really good rapport. And so it helps when the team's good. For any broadcaster, I can tell you that from my own experiences. When the team is good, people tend to like what the guy on TV or on the radio is saying about the team. So that certainly helps. But I think that fans are going to be all in on what Drew can provide. And now they get him 100% of the time, which is awesome.
Yeah, he stepped into a difficult spot last year and did amazing. I was super proud of him. I thought you were gonna make fun of him a little bit more, but you got the dig in. I appreciate it. Real quick, want to shout out our official ticket partner here, Game Time. It's summertime, so we got shows, we got baseball going on. You want to go over to Fenway. You want to get ready for the NFL games coming up this fall. It can never be too early to look ahead on tickets. But the best part about Game Time is right up until game time, even a little bit after, you sometimes get the best deals over there. So whether you want to look ahead or get some last minute deals, go to Game Time and you can get $20 off your first purchase right now with code CLNS. Use code CLNS on your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CLNS and get $20 off. Back in the States, I'm going to be looking out for some concerts late this summer. Again, baseball games. Want to get over a couple of those before the playoffs get going. I hope we'll have some playoff baseball here in Boston to look forward to too. But love Game Time. Love that they show you your seats, panoramic view. And they got the lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. That's Game Time. Again, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. I want to hear about your experience out there, Noah. I was hoping to link up with you out there, but it's crazy. Huge city, a little tough to get around. And I know you had all the games to get to out there as well. So what was the experience like being out there? Had you been to Paris before? How much were you able to get around, see the city? And what was it just like being around the Olympics?
Yeah, I would say this trip, Bobby, I got to see the city zero. It was a lot of work, as we had chatted about. I was doing the men and the women, so I had games daily, and we
Yeah.
did some non-US games. The fortunate thing for me was I had done the French Open tennis tournament about a month and a half prior to that, and so that one I was in Paris for 18 days, and I had 3 full off days. So on my 3 full off days, I just walked and I just viewed and I just took in recommendations and I checked things off the list. So I really got to explore a lot and get a feel for Paris and get a feel for what France had to offer essentially. So that was amazing. And I was glad I got to do that because I knew that on this trip, despite it being 22 days, it was going to be 0 off time essentially, which ended up coming to fruition. So the trip itself was incredible. I loved being there. I got to do the 3x3 for the Tokyo Olympics, but I was doing that from Connecticut. So I didn't get to feel an Olympic atmosphere, and there were no fans for that one anyway. To feel the fan support in the buildings for these games was something I had never experienced. And I do big time college football games where the crowd is insane. I've done huge NBA games and conference finals and things of that nature where the crowd is fantastic. I've done NFL games, an NFL playoff game. This was different. It was a different level of noise. It was a different level of energy. When there were France games and they put on the French national anthem, basically it was just the music side, and every single person in the building was belting along word for word in unison to the French national anthem. There was something goosebumps inducing about that every single time. And every time I would just look around and I would just take it in and say, wow, this is something I'll never probably experience at this level again. And so it was a special run. It was awesome to have our team with us. We had a great team. I thought Dwayne Wade was really, really impressive. I mean, he had never called a game before we started, and he was great from day one, but he only got better all the way through the end, and he wanted to do well. He was putting in the work, putting in the effort. I love that. He was a great teammate. LaChina Robinson on the women's side, equally as impressive, just an encyclopedia of knowledge. And great hang, so that's always great to have awesome sideline reporters as well, and Kareth Burke and Zora Stevenson and our whole crew. So the entire experience was definitely towards the top of the list for me, and it only helps when you get three of the all-time games. I talked to my dad afterward, and he goes, "You'll call basketball for 40 years, and you'll probably never get three games like that ever again. So hopefully you
Oh,
enjoyed yourself." I was like, "Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Good to know that it's only downhill from here." But it was incredible, man.
yeah. I don't want to throw a dig, but with the state of the Nets too, it's not pointing upward.
Hey, man, what about capturing the flag? Come on.
Um, how'd the opportunity come together? Because I was thrilled to see it. I wasn't surprised to see it because I obviously know what you're capable of and have seen what you've done going back to the Clippers days and even Syracuse. You and Wade linking up for this. How'd it come together? How like early before the Olympics started, did you know you'd be doing this? And what was the preparation and lead up process like? And then eventually getting to do it.
Yeah, so when I joined NBC, I joined NBC a little over a year ago at this point. And when I joined, they had said, "Hey, you'll be a part of Olympics in some capacity," basically. So I didn't know what that was going to be. At first, they called and they're like, "Yeah, we could put you on basketball, but we're considering some other stuff." And I was like, "Or don't
Beach
consider other."
volleyball.
Yeah, I was like, "Or well, I mean that I would
Yeah.
have been intrigued, but I was like, maybe don't consider other stuff. I like basketball. Basketball's good." So eventually, what happened was when LeBron, Embiid, KD, and Steph all said they were going to play for the United States, they called me back and they were like, "Look, now that we realize how big this could be in a potential Victor Wembanyama France gold medal game." This was a year before the Olympics. They almost predicted exactly what was going to happen. They go, "We think that France and the US could play in the gold medal game. We want you to do it. So just start thinking about it now," basically. So this, I would say, was August of 2023. And I said, "Amazing." So that was the first contact. We kept talking about it. And then around Christmas, we started thinking about potential analysts of who might work. And we had some ideas that didn't quite go in the direction that we expected them to go. And so my agent came to me with the idea, who also represents Dwayne. And they were like, "Hey, what do you think about this? Do you think you'd want to do it with Dwayne?" I was like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome. I think he'd be great." So we brought it to NBC, and over the course of a couple months, there were a lot of discussions and chatter back and forth. And Dwayne was all in on doing it, and they were all in on having him. So they loved him really, really from the start. It just obviously takes time to get everything together. So yeah, once we got it together, it was all good. LaChina was on pretty early, probably in January or February, and so we knew exactly what we were going to have. We knew that we were going to have some fun more than anything. And then we took a couple calls, all of us together. Dwayne and myself and our producer Josh Veltri got on some calls. LaChina and Josh and I got on some calls. Zora, I've done a lot with now over the last couple of years. So it was easy from that point on. We just built kind of a rapport right off the rip and just went from there.
How do you think Wade did, being in his first time and, doing it alongside him? And how'd you try to interact and build a rapport with him as it went along there? And do you think this is something like he's passionate about, he wants to do going forward?
I think he's got some decisions to make, and we've talked about it, and he's going to really weigh out all the options of what he wants to do long term. I think he thoroughly enjoyed it though, and he had done studio in the past. I think he recognized that there are advantages to doing studio, but he wanted to be at the events and he wanted to be around the people and see the people that he knows and loves, which he got to for this, obviously, with LeBron and Carmelo Anthony being there and Eric Spoelstra being an assistant and Steph and KD and Anthony Edwards, his Tom Crean disciple. So that part was awesome. To answer the first part of it, how did he do? I thought he was excellent. I mean, to step into that role, having never called a game before, and literally our first game was France and Brazil, and our second game was Canada and Greece, and he crushed both of them. I thought that was unbelievable. And people don't realize how hard that is to do, to just step right up and to perform at the level that he did. And he only got better, in terms of building the rapport. That always comes with just hanging out and getting to know guys. And so we would go to dinner, we would hang out before games, we would hang out in between games, we would hang out in the hotel, whatever. we would just be around each other and talk and get to know each other and joke around and realize that we have similar interests in certain avenues of life or whatever it might be. So that just comes naturally and with shared experience as well, where each day it got a little bit better because we had another funny thing happen to us, or we were walking in and this happened, or someone said this, whatever it might have been. So he was fantastic. I think if he wants to do it, he has a chance to be off the charts good because he does really work hard. And I got to see that up close and he wants to be great. And there's a reason he was great as a player. It would be the same reason he would be great as a broadcaster. He would work at it tirelessly until he was the best.
Yeah, and we grew up watching him, which much have been like are inspiring as you're looking at. Because again, Celtics fans, maybe not your favorite player growing up battling with him because he was scary for that handful of years there at his
Yeah.
peak. What was it just like being around him? Was there a story he told you, or just maybe a call he had, or something that really stuck with you from being alongside him for that run?
Well, I'll tell you the memory that'll stick with me because there were a lot of stories and things of that nature. But the memory for me was after one of the US games in Paris, they were playing Empire State of Mind by Jay-Z, where he drops the line that he's going to pay Dwayne Wade, basically.
Yeah.
And I know every word to the song because I'm a New Yorker and that's actually a requirement. And that's our New York anthem, essentially, at this point. And so I was staring him down as I was rapping, and he just couldn't stop laughing. But yeah, I dropped the line directly to Dwayne Wade. So for me, that's got to be like a bucket list item, right? That's got to be top tier. So that's probably number one from the entire. Forget the games itself. That's got to be number one on the list for the entire trip.
I'll take that one. I like that. I want to give a quick shout out to one more sponsor here before we get out of here. I got one more question for Noah before we wrap this up. But HelloFresh, I am wicked excited to be back from Europe and get my HelloFresh box every week. You can customize when it comes. It's America's #1 meal kit for a reason. It's all that customizability, farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients, seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Seasonal recipes, quick and easy ones. If you don't like spending a ton of time in the kitchen, they have stuff to get you in and out. And it's easy. They prepackage the ingredients as instructions. They make it fun, and I do love cooking. But if you don't, there's stuff for you here too. And whether you're vegan or whatever your dietary restrictions might be, allergies and all that, they customize everything. So for free breakfast for life right now, go to hellofresh.com/freegarden. That's free garden, FREEGARDEN. One breakfast item per box while the subscription's active. That's free breakfast for life as long as you use HelloFresh. Just by going to hellofresh.com/freegarden. America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh, one of my favorite sponsors we've had here at the Garden Report, and thrilled to get my box from them this week. Interesting. So NBC is going to have the rights, Noah, in a couple of years here. What are you looking forward to in that capacity now? And is that like a process where there's starting to be some conversations about how that's going to look here? And just as a basketball fan, what are you looking forward to in terms of NBC having the rights and just some of the changes we're going to see in terms of how games are broadcast once all that gets started in 2 seasons?
That's a great question that I don't have many answers to yet. I think that the funny part of all of this was it happened while we were at the Olympics, or as we were definitely getting ready for the Olympics, and so all the focus in the company was on that and making sure
Yeah.
that went smoothly. And now we have to go straight basically into football. So I think they're starting to begin the process of figuring out what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like. I think a lot of it will have that throwback feel. Obviously, the round ball rock part of that is very nostalgic, and I think that'll continue. They've got a new version of round ball rock that's going to be coming, a little bit more mastered and modernized version from John Tesh and company. But overall, I think it's going to be a great product because that's what we do at NBC. We don't cut any corners. So I think if you look at any of the properties that we have, whether it's our Big Ten coverage, the Sunday Night Football stuff, NASCAR, horse racing, everything that we do, it is at the highest of qualities. And so I think that's what you'll see with the NBA. And look, Adam Silver was very intimately aware of what NBC brought to the table because he was with the NBA when NBC was the leading partner. So he knows what NBC is capable in terms of eyeballs on a broadcast network, in terms of a streaming capability now with Peacock and how that's growing, especially post Olympics. So I think that it's going to be a really good property, and hopefully we can go all in on it and make it the best available for all the viewership.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see who the cast is going to be, new studio shows, all that. I know Tristan Thompson, when I talked to him, was interested in getting back in the studio as well. He was an ESPN guy. We'll see what happens if he's going to play another year and all that too. But I think there's going to be some new stars. I think there's going to be some new names that we get to know. And of course, you were one of them. Noah Eagle joining us here on the Garden Report, CLNS Media, Celtics All Access. Great catching up with you here. And I got to ask, is this going to be the year for Syracuse football? Because I need it. I don't think I'm going to be able to watch many Patriots games this year the way it's looking, if it's anything like last year. So this is like the first year in my life, I think, that I'm going to be watching more Syracuse football than Patriots football.
I mean, I know they've got dogs. They've got guys that would fight through a sprained ankle any day of the week to play for their team on a Saturday to make sure that they can grit it out, grind it through. Fran Brown is a master recruiter. He's a master motivator. So we're going to find out if he can coach. I mean, their schedule is as favorable as any power football team in the entire country. So if they can't get it done this year, then we got a deeper discussion.
Yeah, Noah mentioned it. I fought through this podcast on a sprained ankle. That's a first for me. But
I'm
that's
just
just what
surprised you didn't unleash the Barkley impression. You didn't want to go, well, we're maybe milking that baby thing. It's not like doing a podcast on a sprained ankle.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, I'm gonna be milking this for the next few weeks here, certainly. And I'm just back from Europe, so I think I just need to sit back and watch some baseball anyway. Noah, great catching up with you. Great talking to you as always. Great job with the Olympics. Congrats again for that opportunity and everything else coming for you. You've been outstanding since you stepped off Syracuse's campus, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for you.
I appreciate you, man. It's Newhouse and Orange Mafia forever. So I appreciate you, and thanks for having me as always.